The People Nation Alliance formed on the same date as the Folk Nation on November 11, 1978. When Larry Hoover held the meeting with allies and enemies in Pontiac Prison on that date, he worked with his enemies to iron out how alliances and wars would be controlled in prison. In this meeting, leaders of the El Rukns, Vice Lords, and Latin Kings mutually agreed to call their counter-alliance the People Nation. The People Nation adopted religious concepts unlike the Folk Nation. The El Rukns adopted Islamic fundamentals in 1976, and they wanted the Vice Lords to adopt the same ideals when the People Nation formed. The Vice Lords agreed to adopting the Islamic faith, and both organizations represented the Islamic side of the People Nation. The Latin Kings represented Christian beliefs. El Rukns and Mickey Cobras ended their war in prison since the death of Mickey Cobra leader Henry Mickey Cogwell, as the Mickey Cobras joined the People Nation. The Four Corner Hustlers became a Vice Lord faction and were then invited to join the People Nation. The Latin Kings agreed to end their wars with Latin Counts, Bishops, PR Stones, and Insane Unknowns so that these gangs could join the People Nation. The Spanish Lords were close allies with Latin Kings, so it was easy for them to walk into the alliance. These were the original gangs that joined the People Nation in prison in 1978. The alliance was only to use to control prison wars, but in the year 1981 a black disciple leader, Michael Mickey Bull Johnson, was released from prison and invited many more organizations into the rival Folk Nation. This meant the People Nation needed to respond right away, and in 1981 several more gangs were invited into the People Nation, and People Nation bylaws were beginning to be enforced on the streets. The People Nation Alliance was quite a bit less gangs, so they made up for it by keeping their alliance tight all throughout the 1980s, while the Folk Nation gangs started to tear each other apart in the late 1980s. There were only small disagreements and skirmishes that the Latin Kings were involved in against the Insane Deuces, Latin Counts, Puerto Rican Stones, and Ghetto Brothers organizations. However, the gangs were at peace the vast majority of the time. By 1990, the Latin Kings were at war with the Insane Deuces and were on the verge of war with the Latin Counts. The Latin King and Insane Deuce War of 1990 was the first full-blown people-on-people war within the alliance in history. By 1991, the Latin Kings were at war with the Latin Counts, Bishops, and Cullerton Deuces, and as the decades progressed, the Latin Kings were at war with many other People Nation gangs. Factions of Black P-Stones, Vice Lords, and Mickey Cobras began engaging in wars in certain parts of the city. Bishops and Latin Counts went into a bloody war in 1991, and eventually the People Nation became as fractured as the Folk Nation.